and thank you for joining us today. My name is Anne. I am the presenter and the consultant at the Connecting Up, as well as the Digital Transformation Hub. So thank you for coming to our NFP Employees Mastering 365, working with cloud files today. But first, I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. I also acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and is always was and always will be the Aboriginal land. Before we begin, we'll start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues or questions, please enter them into the chat. We will answer all questions in the Q&A sessions during the session's wrap-up. We'd like to encourage you to ask as many questions throughout the sessions that you think of to make this as dynamic and interactive a session as possible. No question is too silly. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording as well as the presentation slide deck will be sent to you in the follow-up email right after these sessions. So in today's webinar, we will learn how to evaluate the best options to suit your needs when file sharing, discuss why one option stands out as the preferred options when file sharing, weigh up different considerations when file sharing internally and externally to ensure the best fit solutions is selected. Let's dive in. I want to introduce first to you the benefits of moving to the cloud and using the cloud technology. There's a distinct benefits to using cloud-based technology for developing files and also for sharing and publishing. The first features is the version history. The version is automatically updated every time you save a document in the cloud. For example, version 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, or version 123. A history of who last edited the document is also available in version history. So I can explain more in a specific use case. However, with version history, you no longer live in the fear of losing your most updated version of the documents. You do not have to save several versions of the same documents. So this is a very useful features in the cloud. The next one is sync for offline access. This allows you to save a local copy of all the files and documents to your device to work on when you're offline, not connected to the internet. Cloud technology also allows you and your team to collaborate, edit documents at the same time, edit all the files in real time. Changes will normally be marked up on the documents so that you can view who made the changes and where those others people in your team are currently at in that document. External sharing is also available with cloud technology. Instead of sending a file like we used to and having file size limitations when you attach the file to an email, you can now share larger files by sending links to them. The recipient is then be able to access all those files easily. Mobile access is another cool feature. You can access all your documents, files, anytime, anywhere, as well as you have an account to a cloud platform and a good internet connections. File level permissions is another strength of cloud. It allows you to set access and edit permissions at file level. It's very easy to manage files in any cloud platform because you can drag and drop files easily. It makes for ease of movement of files. You don't have to copy or paste files. So it's easier to use files in the cloud. It also has the ability to create and store very large file size, with larger file size than previously possible. You used to be limited by your network drive capacity using cloud technology. We now see approximately 250 gigabyte storage capacity, which is massive. Excuse me, but I just want to check if I have started the recording. Yeah, oh good, the recording is started. So now we can, yeah, make sure, I just want to make sure that, yeah, the recording is already in there. Let's continue with our webinar. Enough about the benefits of cloud technology. Now we will start wonder what is cloud technology, what is available in there. To understand this webinar further, let's go back to basics to understand the different cloud technologies available. There are a number of technologies that we will have a look during this webinar, including Teams, Sharepoint, and OneDrive. With Teams, it is a collaborative app built for organizations, big, small, or even a small project teams. Whether you're working remotely or in the office together, you can develop, collaborate, and publish your work in Teams. It's a workspace hub that has a centralized chat system that connects teams and enable quick messaging and file sharing in a way that's a lot more efficient than email and can cope with much bigger file size. So for me, whenever I come into the office, the only app I need to open is Teams. I no longer have to open so many apps at the same time when I start my computer every day. Let's move on to the next technology, which is SharePoint. Some of you might have heard of SharePoint before. We often see SharePoint used by large nonprofits and organizations. It should be used to store most organizational files. It is designed to enable collaboration and sharing across organizations or within a restricted group. You will often find that large nonprofits and organizations use it for their intranets. And the last one I want to introduce is OneDrive. OneDrive lets you store and protect your personal files, share them with others by granting them permissions, and access them from any location or device. So to make it short, SharePoint is, as its name, is for sharing with other people in your organization. OneDrive is for one person, which is by default. It's for personal files, for document draft that you are not ready to share with other people in your teams yet. But with the growth of Office 365 platform, now instead of SharePoint, we also have Teams. Team is more like a one-stop shop for you. So you have all kinds of features and functions that are accessible to you other than just file storage. Additionally, you will have heard of Office 365, which is known as software as service solution that provide access to the standard Microsoft Office suite as well as some new productivity services. It has heaps of other apps and it contains all the three that I mentioned before, Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. You can start off by trying out Office 365 and Teams and OneDrive, and then have a play with it and decide. Let's continue. Let's look at the benefits of using cloud-based technologies, the difference between Teams and OneDrive to see which apps is suitable for your organizations. When should I use OneDrive? OneDrive should be used to store documents and files that you wish to keep to yourself privately. It is a lot like the old network drives that we had for our personal use, but way more useful and easier to access. With the move to remote learning and working a lot from home, and school and business start moving to cloud, OneDrive is really good for file storage. It can be used to store and share draft document with a few people on a temporary basis until it is ready to eventually store in Teams. OneDrive also allows you to sync files from the cloud to your computer. Personal OneDrive, Teams, SharePoint, document libraries, all of those are available to sync files, but OneDrive is the most popular one. With OneDrive, you no longer store files on your PC, but in the cloud to protect them from loss or deletions. Changes are updated whenever you have an internet connections, and key folders such as desktop documents, pictures, you should also be synced to your personal OneDrive, as it helps back up those important folders or drives. These files and folder can also be managed using Window Explorer and Sync on Demand to conserve bandwidth and file storage. So if you look at the image right now, you can see an example of how OneDrive is synced to a computer and using Window Explorer to manage files. You can see the status column in there, showing the status of the files that are synced. So yeah, please start using it and have a try with OneDrive. How about Teams? Teams, as I mentioned, is more like a one-stop shop in the Office 365 platform. Teams is the front interface for SharePoint and OneDrive, but you're just accessing them from a different front end. Teams direct you to SharePoint when you open a file, or OneDrive when you share files in a private chat. But remember that a private chat is only visible to those participating in the chat. So try to minimize the amount of files shared in private chats, as once the person leaves your nonprofits, the private chats become inaccessible. So instead of sharing a file directly in private chat, you can share a link to the file that is stored in the shared organizational space. Move your files from OneDrive to Teams when you are ready to collaborate with your teams and peers. I'll explain more about this point when we move on to the use case. The last of the three is SharePoint. SharePoint is used by several nonprofits that we work with for file storage and synchronizations. For smaller nonprofits, we recommend the use of Teams instead of SharePoint, because SharePoint is great for larger nonprofits or organizations to use for their intranet. Now that we have explained SharePoint a little, we are going to focus on OneDrive and Teams, as these are the two cloud technologies that the majority of you will be interested in. Let's compare Teams and OneDrive. With Teams and OneDrive, they are both used mainly for file storage. However, access is determined by permissions of the folder in Teams. While in OneDrive, personal storage is by default unless you share the permissions with other users. Teams is best used for sharing documents or files for collaborations, while OneDrive is best used for drafting documents or storing personal files. Version history and collaborations are both available in Teams and OneDrive. However, the security is controlled a bit different between Teams and OneDrive. In Teams, it's centralized control of permissions. However, in OneDrive, by default, the permission must be managed individually. It by default can only be accessed by the individual who owns it. If you want to share with other people, the owner needs to share it manually with other people. Teams include a wide range of tools, including dashboard, libraries, calendar, branding tools, etc. However, OneDrive is only used for file storage and sharing only. Sharing file is very easy when using cloud technology. Instead of sending the file like we did in the old day, we send a link to a document which enables the recipients to access it. If you need to, you can also send the file itself rather than a link. When sending a link to the file in Teams, you do not need to concern about the file size or email limits. If you send the file itself, you still need to take this into consideration though. For example, your PowerPoint file might be 14 megabytes and your email attachment limit might be 10 megabytes. In this scenario, the file will not send. You would be better served to send a link to ensure it gets to the recipient in no delay. Now it's the case study that we're looking forward to. Let's look at a real life application based on what we have learned so far. David has to draft a grant proposal and wants to save it somewhere where it can't be accessed by anyone except him. So at that moment, he's going to use OneDrive. Once David has finished the draft and proofreads it himself and is happy with it, he needs to get his colleagues to review it. The best way to facilitate this, as he wants multiple people to review at the same time, is to move it into the grant proposal folder on Teams. At that moment, he creates a link and send the link to his team so the team can review the draft with him. Opening the link he sent, his team now can access the proposal and mark it up with any changes and comments that they need. David can review in real time. Any changes and comments can be accessed real time as well. Whoever made the change, he can comment below and then he can chat with them in Teams as well for clarifications. The teams are working on the file at the same time, if need be, to ensure that proposal is ready on time. Once David and the team members has resolved all comments and completed the review feedback, and it is ready for board approval, he now can send the link to the board so they can finalize the proposal. So that's one of the case study of how you can use OneDrive and Teams for collaborations, edit and manage documents in real life, instead of creating so many versions of the same documents. You now can just use one single document with version history to manage the documents in real life. So that's all the content of the webinar today. Now we will move on to the Q&A sessions. Please feel free to put more questions in the comments or turn on your mic to let us know if you have any questions. I can see the question from Midden. With OneDrive, does it use storage of local PC as well? Thank you for your questions. Let me move back a few slides. If you sync OneDrive, yes, will use storage of your local PC. However, by default, it will not use much local storage. Why? Because Microsoft has developed a technology called file on demand. By default, when you sync your file to your local computer, they only download all the metadata of those files and folder. By metadata, I mean all the name, created dates, date modified, how the files are changed, and then the status of the file, the size, all those information around the files. The moment you click on the files, it then download the file to your computer, and it is so smart that it will it knows which files and folder you normally use, and it will keep those frequently used files and folder on your computer. However, I know that not all users have great internet connection everywhere they go, especially when they have to meet client on site. So Microsoft OneDrive also allow you to have the option to always download the file to your computer. So if you want to save space, you can use the default mode. However, if you want to all the files to be available offline, all the changes will be updated frequently to your computer, and you want to download the file to your computer physically, then you can have the options to always keep the files on your computer. I hope that answers your question. So continue with the document, the question from Midden. So the document that needs to be shared across the team members, it is better to upload in Teams rather than OneDrive. Shared across the team members. Yes, so with Teams, it's for organizational files, and with OneDrive, it's for personal files. I have met clients that store organizational files in their OneDrive, and then they have so much challenges afterwards because it's very hard to share the files to other members. It's hard to manage the permissions of those files shared through OneDrive because whenever you want to share something in OneDrive, you have to manually give the other person permission to access that file or folder. So the permissions are going to be very messy. That's why we choose the options to store documents in Teams, which is the permissions is centralized. You manage the permissions by folder, by document libraries, to make it short, by the area that you choose to apply the permissions, not at file level like OneDrive. So it's easier to manage. And whenever that person, any person leaves the organizations, the files are still there in that shared space. So it's very good for organizational files. However, if you store organizational files in OneDrive, that when that persons who own the OneDrive leave organizations, you must migrate the files or move those files in their OneDrive into another shared space. So make it right from the start instead of having to resolve the issue later on. Thank you, Marcus, for answering question about the recording. Mary is asking a question. Is there a way to see who created a shared document, the creator or owner? Definitely yes. So in the image here, I'm just not showing that that column, but definitely, yeah, whoever created the document, who made any changes, if you turn on version history, even the small changes can be found. And yeah, Microsoft Office 365 platform do record a lot of information around the files, who modified, date modified. It also have some very advanced features that you can even set the approval for some files. So if somebody upload a documents in a folder or document libraries, for example, you can set up an approval workflow in that folder. So yeah, there are more roles in other than just editor, creator, or viewer. There's also approval role as well. So it has heaps of good features that allow you to manage documents. Midden also asked a question. Any files we upload in Teams will be available on OneDrive as well? My answer is no. Teams and OneDrive are two different spaces. So if it's available in OneDrive, it's going to be a duplicates, and duplicates it's not a good thing that we would like to maintain with file management. When you upload files to Teams, it's usually organizational files, project Teams files that you would like to share with other members. OneDrive is for individual use, your personal files, the files you use as draft and they are not ready yet to be shared with other people. When I start using cloud technology in general, Office 365 specifically, and I sync my OneDrive to my computer, I no longer store my files in my local computer, but I store my personal files in OneDrive. So it's easier for me to access this from anywhere. If I work on a personal files in my OneDrive in my office and on a work computer, but when on the way home, suddenly a client called me and they want to ask some question about the files I stored in my OneDrive. I can easily access the file through my phone, or urgently it's from my personal computer in an urgent case. So it now acts as your OneDrive acts as your personal space to store files instead of your local computer. Midden also wonder what is OneDrive for Business will be used for. Which version, which type of OneDrive is available depend highly on which license of Office 365 you are using. With a test account or a personal account, OneDrive normally go as the personal versions. However, with nonprofits, you are eligible for 10 free business premium licenses of Microsoft 365. You can find out more information in Connecting Up website. That license or other type of Office 365 licenses that use for business or nonprofit organization usually go with OneDrive for Business. As its name, OneDrive for Business is dedicated for business organizations. It has more features and more stable than the personal versions when it comes to large files and collaborations. So the OneDrive for Business used for business, and you can test it out, try it out with the 10 free donations licenses that should be available for nonprofits. Thank you, Marcus, for your contribution as well. Any questions? Please feel free. We still have another few minutes to answer questions. So there's a question I got from hello, Kim. Do you have any question? There's a question I got from email earlier before this webinar is what is the difference icons in the OneDrive means? So if you look at the image I'm showing on the screen right now with a sync OneDrive, all the different icon in the status column has its own meaning. With the green tick in a circle with a white background, it's mean that the files is currently downloaded to your computer and can be accessed offline. However, it's not downloaded forever. It's Microsoft OneDrive knows that it's the file or folder you frequently use, so it keeps the files downloaded to your computer. But if after a long while you no longer use it, then they will remove the downloaded files and just download the metadata information of the files. The cloud icons in the status column mean that the files and folders are currently stored in the cloud, but not downloaded to your computer yet. And another icon that is not available in this image, which is a green tick in a circle, but with green background as well. It's mean that the files or folders is chosen to be always kept on the computer. So it will always be downloaded to your computer whenever there's an internet connection. A question from Mary. When sharing a document to an external party, is this best done through Teams or OneDrive? Thank you, Marcus. Normally, if it's a one-off and it's temporary, it's not a part of a long-term project, and yeah, as I said, it is a one-off, then you can quickly share it through OneDrive. It happens when you want to attach a file and then you send it to an external party. Yeah, and it's not that important. And you know that you will not need to, your team will not need to refer to it in the future, then OneDrive can be a temporary options. However, if it's a board members, for example, and board members will work together with some of your staff in a long term, more than 3 months, more than 6 months. The best option is set up a portal or a separate area or a Teams or channels, whichever suitable for the case, the specific circumstance. Just set up an area that you can share with others, external user. Then it's easier to refer back to those documents. You no longer have to manage those files through email. And the external user can come in and upload files and manage file in that shared area as well. So with temporary, not unimportant files, one-off files, you can quickly share with external users or OneDrive. However, with those that important long-term and you need a point of reference, after you send the files or folders to external parties, and set up a shared space in Teams. Yeah. If we no longer have any questions, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll have more lunch and learn options in the upcoming weeks. So please feel free to join us in the upcoming webinars. And thank you so much for your time today, and have a nice weekend. Aloha, Ken. Bye, everyone.